We're going to show you how to make a quick gift bag for Christmas. Now it's entirely up to you what size you want to make. Both of these have started off with 8-inch squares of fabric and you're going to use the Vlieseline F220. Both of these started off at 8-inch squares of fabric, but depending on what size you do this flat bottom will depend whether you have a slightly taller bag or you'll have a slightly squarer bag, and that can depend on what gift you are giving. So to make the little bag, what you're going to need are 2 8-inch squares for the outer fabric and 2 8-inch squares for the lining. And you also need 2 8-inch squares of the Vlieseline F220. So the Vlieseline F220 has a fusible side and it just feels a little bit rougher. You're going to pop that onto the reverse of your outer pieces. And it's much easier to iron it this way. Now, this has got a straight edge, so I'm just going to eliminate some cutting here. And I'm going to pop this on. And you're going to use a warm iron. And you're just going to press. And that will activate the glue. And it'll adhere the F220 to the reverse of your outer fabrics. And you're going to do that for both pieces. Now, the beauty about this little bag is you can make this any size you want. Just ensure that all of the fabrics are the same size. And of course, you have sufficient F220. Once the F220 is fused, what you'll do is just trim the excess off. And you're going to repeat this for your 2 outer pieces. Now, if you look at this fabric, you can see that all of the pattern is going in the same direction. So just think about that when you're putting your pieces together. So I want the top of the parcels to be at the top of the bag. So I'm going to place my 2 outer pieces right sides together. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to mark these corners here so I can have a flat bottom on the bag. The simplest way to do that is to layer up both pieces, or you can do them individually if you want to. Get a square ruler and a marking pen or pencil, and I'm just putting a 2-inch square here. Now, depending on the size of the square that you may choose for your basket, you can increase the size of this cutout or you can decrease it. The bigger the square, the flatter the bottom, and the shallower the finished product will be. Once you've marked it, it's much easier to use a nice sharp pair of scissors, cut up to that point, cut up to that one, rotate them together, and then cut them out. Now, I wouldn't even waste these small pieces. Pop them into your bag because later on you may just want to make some small gift tags to attach to a present. So we now have the shapes cut out and you're going to repeat this on the lining as well. Pop your pins in the sides, and remember, if you have that directional fabric, you need to have everything going in the right direction. And we're going to sew down both sides and along this short bottom. So we're now at the stage of sewing. If you have a 1/4-inch foot on your sewing machine, then you can use that. We're using a 1/4-inch seam, ideally, but it isn't critical. So I'm just going to do a little reverse stitch at the top there. The reverse stitch is simply just securing the stitching. When you're doing general patchwork, you don't need to do that because the seams will actually cross over each other and they will secure. If you're dressmaking, of course, then you would always do a reinforcing stitch at the beginning and at the end. So we've sewn down that side. We're going to sew along that bottom. I'm going to give you a little tip. If you have a machine that sometimes, as you're starting on the very edge of fabric, occasionally the thread can get caught underneath and it's a little bit of a nuisance. So if you have a couple of pieces of fabric, you can sew on the fabric and sew off, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So I've come to the end of there, and I'm just going to sew on this fabric, which is just a scrap that I have, and then I can take that out. Now the reason being is that because I'm asking my machine to start at the very edge, so I'll sew off that fabric now, and I'm going to feed that final side in, and you'll find that you'll get less tangling and less issues with your threads under here. Just going to sew up that side. So that's the two sides and along the bottom sewn. I'm going to sew back onto there. So it doesn't have to be a large piece of fabric, just something that you can sew on and sew off to. It's just a handy little tip. So the next stage is that we need to create the flat bottom. All you're going to do is bring the side seam and the bottom seam together. Pop your hand in, and it's a bit like a mouth. Bring these two together, and you can either have the seams so they're lying open, or you can have the seams so they're going in opposite directions. Pop a pin in the seam, and it'll just make sure you've got it nice and flat there. And you'll find that you don't need to pin the other side, but you could pop a pin in just to keep it secure, or a quilt clip, and we're going to stitch along this side here. So just squash the bag underneath, get it so it's nice and flat. And just take your time doing it, making sure the seams are all lined up. What I haven't mentioned here is that I'm just using a standard universal needle, size 80, and my stitch length is actually a 2 or a 2.5 is more than adequate. Now you're going to repeat that on the other side. So we have created the flat bottom on the outer fabric, and you're going to do exactly the same on the lining fabric. Now the outer fabric, you're going to turn the bag to the right side, poke out all your corners, and you can give it a little press. That's the outer bag. The lining you don't turn out. The next stage is we're going to drop the outer bag inside the lining, and we're going to match the side seams. Now again, you can have the seams so they will lie open. What I mean by that is like that, or alternatively have one seam going one way and one seam going the other way. Pop a pin in the seams first. Just make sure they come around the other side, and have your pins so they are vertical. Go round to the other side seam, match those seams up again. Either open the seams, or alternatively have one seam going one way and one seam going the other. Pop a pin in. You could use quilt clips if you wanted to, and you've got the side seams matched. Once you've got the side seams matched, everything else will just fall into place beautifully. Pop some pins in to secure it. Don't be mean on the pins, because all it'll do, the more pins you have, it'll keep those fabrics together, and when we're sewing them, it'll just make life so much easier. So all the top row edges are now being matched, and we're popping a little pin in. So your bag will look like this. What we're now going to do is take it back to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew around, but this time we're going to leave a gap. Now my little tip for that is, because I regularly forget to leave a gap, is just put a double pin where you want the gap to be. And that just means as you are approaching it, you will remember as you hit the double pin, so I'll start sewing at the double pins, sew all the way around and finish at a double pin. So we're now ready to sew the top of the bag. If you have an accessory box, or you may have your extension table, just remove it and you have a free arm on your sewing machine, and that's designed to sew items such as this or in the circle. Pop the bag on, and remember we're going to start at the double pins. So I'm lining the bag up and we're going to sew that top edge, and again use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to take those 2 pins out, and with this just start sewing and do a little bit of sewing, and then just make sure that your bag is lying nice and flat. And you're going to sew all the way around until we reach those double pins. So we've now reached the double pins. Got to sew up there, just do a little reverse stitch and then take it out of the machine. So now we've sewn all the way around the top, you're going to find the gap that you left and you're going to turn the whole bag through. You just pop your fingers in and just pull it through. So this is the lining, this is the outer bag. You're now going to pop the lining inside the bag, and we're going to find the top edge, and at this point give it a nice press. So what I've done is I've given it a little press, I've rolled the seams so they're all lovely and matching along the top. I've added some quilt clips just because it's easier. This is where the opening is. And all I'm going to do is top stitch all the way around, quite close to the edge, and that will close that opening. So pop it back onto your machine, pop it underneath the foot and lower your foot. Just get it in the right position. Oops. And what we're going to do is stitch around. Now when you're using the quilt clips, you may find that the quilt clips can catch underneath your machine. So it's really important just to do a small amount of stitching and then to stop, recheck your fabric and then carry on. So I've just done a few there. I'm going to stop and just move it around, so I always ensure that the fabric that's is being fed into the machine is lying nice and flat. And stop, get rid of that pin, just secure everything and carry on stitching. Now you could make a decorative feature of this, of course. You could use a decorative stitch on your sewing machine. You could just use a zigzag stitch. You could use a contrasting thread. I think for Christmas a little bit of gold or silver would look lovely. So we're just finishing off the stitching back to where we started. Do a little overlap. Take it out of the machine. And then all you're left to do is trim off any stray threads, just to neaten it up. Turn over the top of the bag, and there you are, a very quick, easy, it could be a gift bag, it could be a storage bag, could have lots of nice sweets in there for Christmas. As you can see, Vlieseline has a wide range of products, each with different properties and benefits for your projects. You can view the whole range on the Vlieseline website, where you can download the brochure, which has detailed information on all of the products across our 4 categories. You can also join the conversation with us on our Facebook page, Creative Community Group and Instagram. All of the details are below.